And we are starting our next segment with a very special speaker, Kamau Bobb, who is our senior director here at the Constellations Center, but he now has a position at Google as well. And I just want to say I'm just so thankful, Kamau, that you had the time to come with us today, or to come on with us today. We currently have over 540 registered participants that will come on at any given time between now and Wednesday. And so we're super excited about that. But I think it's really important that you're on with us today because you have a really strong and powerful and thoughtful voice, given all of your experiences and your expertise and the reason why we started the Constellations Center. So thanks again for coming on. I'll be back on stage to help with questions and answers, but why don't you start us off with a bit of an introduction and what you will be speaking with us about today.
Will do. Thank you, Lynn. Hello to everyone. Obviously, this is all strange when you can't see anyone that you're speaking with, but thanks for having me. I guess by way of introduction to those that I've not met, as Lynn suggested, I'm the Senior Director of the Constellations Center. Lynn and Charles Isbell, who is the current Dean of the College of Computing at Georgia Tech, and I and others were instrumental in getting this center off the ground. The hypothesis of which, as you probably know, is that we think that there has to be a structural reformation in computing education in order for students who typically don't have access to computing to get that access. I also am the global lead for diversity strategy and research at Google. And the issue there is to do similar things at the higher ed landscape at Google scale. The intent there is to try to reimagine our interface with higher ed institutions to expand computing to make sure, again, that students who would otherwise not have access have access. And to be specific, those students are predominantly Black students, Latinx students, students of color, for all the reasons that you already know. But what I wanted to do here just briefly is I have to acknowledge where we are. It's no secret to anyone. We're in this upside down world that's difficult. Over the weekend, I was just saying to Lynn and Brian and Ali that I could hear the helicopters because I don't live very far from University Avenue over there where they burnt down the Wendy's, over there by Carver High School. Could smell the smoke from here. So we're kind of in the middle of a couple of different things that are going on. So in the before times, before COVID was a thing, certainly in Atlanta public schools, the bifurcation of that system was egregious. I mean, we already knew that the schools are totally segregated from each other. Part of the motivation behind Constellations was to ensure that those schools that were almost 100% Black in Atlanta public schools had access to computing in ways that the three schools which are the only real public high schools in Atlanta public schools where white kids go, they did have computing. But the challenge was to try to get those things into those places. But we already knew that the challenges relative to some of the segregation issues that we're facing were dire. Then COVID came and smashed everybody. And I think here I serve on one of the GO teams. Those are the local leadership teams within the Atlanta Public School District. So I serve on the Maynard Jackson one. My daughter goes to school there. And after March 13th, about 20% of those kids just disappeared. They had no idea where they were. So the idea of virtual learning was a farce for a lot of the students that we already knew were not going to be able to participate in all of this. I mean, I know that y'all are K-12 teachers predominantly and know these things, but I just want to say out loud what we're dealing with. So those students just disappeared. And not only did they disappear from learning, they just disappeared, period. We just don't know where they are and what they're doing. And they're disappearing at a moment where the likelihood of re-entering regular school again is dim. I mean, we don't really know how to handle this convening of students by the tens of thousands in the face of this pandemic. If we scale that up, we also know that whole university systems, the Cal State system in California, for example, already acknowledged that they were going to go fully virtual in the fall. That's 530 something odd thousand students. 47% of them are Latinx students. Nearly 70% of those are Pell Grant recipients. So that means that their households are poor. So their likelihood of being able to facilitate higher level learning in the post-secondary environment is also relatively slim. So the magnitude of the moment that we're in is extraordinary. Couple that now with all of the uprising that we're sensing. So if we're thinking about these kids, I mean, it's personal for everyone, but if we're thinking about it on behalf of young people and they're bearing witness to the slaughter of Black people by police on a nearly weekly basis. And my daughter, like I said, she's 16, and the recurring imagery on TikTok and Snapchat, it's incessant. It's an incessant stream of violence enacted against Black people. Those are the ones that are at the moment. Couple that with the uncertainty and the anxiety associated with the closure of schools. I really can't tell. I mean, I'm trying to be as investigative and listening as carefully as I can to see how she's coping with these things, but I really don't know. And I also know that she's relatively privileged. We're in a comfortable home. We got air conditioning and Wi-Fi and food, and we're good. My wife and I are both working. So we have the basic infrastructure to at least keep her safe and comfortable. I don't know what's necessary to abate her stress because I don't really know how to assess it. But I can extrapolate that amount of stress that our students are facing going forward has got to be extreme. And so I introduce all of this in this way because it's weighing really, really heavy on my heart. And I'm afraid, to be honest, about what happens next. So when we're thinking about the role of the work that we're all doing, and I'll be brief here so that we can just have a little bit of a dialogue. But when we think about the role that we're playing, there's obviously the pedagogical infrastructure of computing and what that means to introduce it formally into the K-12 space, also into the post-secondary environment. A lot of those questions are unanswered. The discussions that that I've been privy to prior to right now this morning and among with you along the way are about that. The details of how do we make this work? What are the appropriate modalities? What are the appropriate scope and sequences? What are the appropriate platforms? What are the appropriate incentive structures? We're navigating all of that because there's no clear answer. And I think all of us are doing as best we can. However, I think now, as the entire public education system is making this pivot into greater dependence on virtual learning, having been forced to do it because of the pandemic, and at the same time, we have these overly stressed and angry young people. The variables now are not sitting in the same sanctified corner as they had been before. I think now, all of us, teachers, administrators, academic folks, we all have to contend with a moment that we weren't really prepared for. I think we knew the reality, of course, but I don't know that we necessarily appreciated the flux that we were going into. So what I would say as a moment here is we have a really, really unusual opportunity to be a part of an American transformation. I think as we're going into this new education world, we don't really know how it's going to all play out. Our role is more than critical. It seems essential to trying to determine what education is going to look like, particularly in this subject, but also for the legions of the kids that we're most concerned about. We have to be very creative and courageous in trying to make sure that they don't just disappear. I think the risks that we face, I know we all know them, but I want to say it. I think the risks that we face is the catalyst of a permanent underclass, where the number of people who have lost jobs, the number of people who can't go to school, the number of kids who don't have parents who can associate with them and prepare them for what's next or help instruct them when the systems that have been designed for them virtually are failing them. It's in the hundreds of thousands. There are 40-something million people unemployed at the moment. Disproportionately, it's those kids who are going to be the ones that are most vulnerable, obviously. So our role in all of this couldn't be more important than it ever has been, certainly in our generation. So I would frame the work that we're doing here in partnerships with the Georgia Department of Education, with Brian and Caitlin, the CTA, CSTA, and the CS for Georgia. I mean, all the big institutions that are doing this work. I think now is our time. My feeling is that we couldn't be doing something more important than we're doing right now. And if we're going to win, I think we have to be very, very courageous in the strategy that we use to ensure that victory. That said, let me stop. I want to thank you for participating in all of this. The details and the procedural work that's going on in this conference are very, very important. But I just wanted to frame the work that we're doing according to my current point of view.
Thank you, Kamau. And Brian and I are back on stage with you to help field some questions as they come in. But in the meantime, I really just wanted to take a moment here and ask you, Kamau, how are you? How have you been managing your own, thoughts and emotions about not just pandemic, but the current calls for justice? How have you been?
It's been up and down. I think, like with everyone, my family and a lot of my friends are in New York. So I know a number of people have died from this pandemic. A number of people have been sick. Our parents are locked in, terrified. So that part of it has been really rough. It's also been difficult to reconcile knowing that against the gubernatorial mandates and the foolishness that we're hearing here. And then coupled with all this killing, watching Black people getting killed is killing me. Like everybody else, some days you're in tears, other days you want to just blow up things. So it's been a bit rough. And then I'm trying to find out for myself, just digging deep, where like hope and faith in the relationship between those things are intimate, obviously. But I'm really having to be reflective on how to engender hope against the facts that I see. So it's day to day, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
The long and short of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have experienced that, roller coaster these past couple of months in one way or another. And I will just say, if you haven't, then I don't know what, you've been hearing or listening to, but it's been rough. There is a question from one of our attendees, Kamau. One of them is from Dr. Mons. She says she can hear your passion in your voice. And what would you like your greatest CS legacy to be?
Well, I appreciate it. I don't have a personal CS legacy. I think I have a collective one. I think that if we can carve out justice in this particular discipline for the people that we know need justice the most, in a time when the global economy and certainly the national economy requires computational skills to be viable as citizens, as people. I think if our legacy is that we've been able to build an equitable infrastructure for CS education and make sure that our people get in this game, I would be pleased with having made that contribution.
Okay.
Kamau, we have another question from Jared Reddick. He says, what suggestions would you have for scholars, researchers looking to maximize their potential impact on the myriad issues we're facing as a people, specifically Black males?
Scholars, researchers broadly?
Broadly, yeah.
Well, I think, generally speaking, clearly, I think our tribe, the folks that are engaged in this, that do the work that you all do, that you're helping us lead, are of a particular mindset. So I think there's certain assumptions about the way the country works and its exclusionary forces that we all agree upon. But that isn't true for the counter argument. The people who are making the case that the conditions that we have befallen us are our own fault, that we are somehow culturally, counter education or counter intelligent and lack the discipline and don't have the culture of school and all those things that we hear as a counter argument. I think one of the scholarly demands that we have is to fortify our argument. We need the data. We need the evidentiary basis that talks about which schools have access, which schools have certified teachers, which schools are offering the classes that are real, which schools are not teaching these classes under some computing moniker, but they know that it's just typing. And where are they aggregating the rich kids or the white kids in particular schools? We need to know that. So when people come with these counter arguments that are dripping in foolishness, that we have the case to be made, that this is in fact what the structure looks like, irrefutable. I also think that some of the other things that we need in terms of discipline, I don't know to the colleague who was asking the question, like if you're involved in education scholarship, a particular concern that I have about the nature of the work that we do is the relationship. Lynn and I have been having this discussion forever. It's the relationship with math, the mathematical maturity necessary for students to be successful in computing in ways that are meaningful is an undetermined question. A lot of the computing courses that we have these kind of base level, introductory, minimal math requirements, but we don't know what those are. And I think that's another thing that needs to be investigated heavily. What are the kind of correlational dependence that mathematics and computing have? We're going to have to find out what those things are, such that if we're imposing or innovating in computing education in certain levels, we know that it can only be successful if students have this kind of mathematics, or we need to teach them together so that we can expect certain outcomes rather than just dropping computing in without consideration of what these other skills are. So those are the two big ones that I would suggest.
All right, so we're just going to keep going with these questions that are coming in. Okay, Kamau. This one's from Matthew. He's asking, dealing with our new reality, how can we empower students laden with stress to see themselves as change makers moving forward and their relationship to careers and adult life?
I think that's a fantastic question, and I don't know the answer, but one of the things that I'm keen on is giving these students the opportunity to say something. My daughter goes to Maynard Jackson High School, and the name of it suggests that they should have been deep in the conversation. The whole school should have been involved, from the impeachment processes, which we've probably forgotten about by now, to the COVID, the disproportionate rates that is hitting Black people in Atlanta, to all this shooting. They didn't say anything. The whole school, nobody said a thing. So you have these 14 to 18-year-olds in the epicenter of a global crisis, the nature of which the nation, the country, the globe has never seen. And these kids don't have a word to say about it. Nobody asked them, nobody challenged them, nothing. And so to me, one of the ways to help them cope is to give them a voice, ask them, push them to be critical about the moment that they're in. And I think that part of it brings them in a way that we don't then have to be as creative as we think we do. Because these cats are the truth. They're out there on these streets warring, battling. But if we ask them, what do you think about these things? How would you recommend somebody who's old in their mid-40s respond? What are the platforms of your ability to engage? What type of skill sets are you getting? Are you being instructed, or are you just being handed assignments? If you're being handed assignments, are you being handed assignments that are relevant to the social contracts and contracts that we're involved with right now, or not? Like, to me, bring them in directly so that they got to deal with these issues. And so to some extent, and I'll stop here. But to some extent, I think we just gave up on all the curricula anyway. So March 13th was the end of school, pretty much. So in that period of time, after they said that you don't have to come back to school unless you want to improve your grade, most of the kids just stopped. But alternatively, what they could have said, if you're going to go out and just forget about your grades, let's now, as a school, focus on this issue. This issue being the pandemic at the time. We hadn't yet had the social uprising yet, but the pandemic, let's focus on that. Let's try to define what it means. Let's try to get the epistemological data. Let's try to define what epistemology is. I mean, we could have pushed them, but we didn't. So to me, that's one way to get these kids to help deal with the stress, to get them engaged with it.
Let's talk. We have another question from Jay Flores. How can we capture the attention of major networks to bring attention to CS as a path forward for communities during these challenging times? For example, Computer Science Week commercials on ABC, NBC, Telemundo, etc.
I don't know. That's tricky in the hierarchy of things that are newsworthy at the moment. But I think one potential path, at least with these companies, I don't know about the networks, but with the companies is the primacy of the technical economy that we're going to be going into after this moment. That's the path forward. So if all these companies who are now talking about I stand with you and I stand in solidarity and I'm Black Lives Matter and blah, 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 boom, boom, whatever. And I'm saying it that way because that's how I feel about it. But if they really wanted to stand with you, then that means that they have to support a pathway for Black lives to matter. They have to matter economically. They have to matter educationally. And in order for those things to happen, then we have to have this computing pathway into the new economy on the other side of this pandemic. So to me, one way to do it is to make that argument very, very clear. And then to the previous question about the scholarship, that's what the scholarship we actually need is, to define where those jobs are, where they will be. What's the transition? What does this inflection point really mean for our ability to participate in the modern economy? And then we align the education with it. So if we can make that argument stratified, then perhaps that's one of the things that become market worthy.
Definitely. Hold them accountable for what they say that they're supporting.
I'm saying, you standing with me all day long, but whatever, you know what I mean?
We just have about another minute, Kamau, and just wanted to provide that opportunity for you for any last words or comments that you can leave us with as we move forward with the summit in the next 2.5 days, with over, like I said, over 500 registered participants. What would be your recommendations for us?
Well, I don't know that I have recommendations, but just thanks. I mean, I think that we're all in this together. I think, you both, Brian and Lynn, I mean, we're all friends, so this is all, almost forced formality. But I think that we're in this game for everyone. I think I'm reflecting on this myself. I mean, this seems like an unusual time to be around. And given the roles that we all play, the burden of responsibility on us is extraordinary. I mean, it's extraordinary. This is our time. So to me, I would offer thanks, but then I would also offer that we pushing each other. I mean, we got to be courageous. I don't know that there are any leaders per se, but we got to be in this game. This is it. Otherwise, I mean, we can really lose. The stakes are extremely high. So for me, I'm thankful, I'm grateful to be a part of this. I feel almost honored to be alive at the moment, to be able to be in a position to fight the way that I can, and to fight with you all the way that we're fighting together.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on, Kamau. We couldn't have done this without you either. And, I feel like we are all in this together, and you're right. We have to keep fighting the good fight, and that's what we're doing. So thank you for that.
Indeed, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the week.
All right.
Always, brother, I'm inspired, and I you give me more questions than answers, but I appreciate that. Now I got to go do some more investigation with math stuff.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Kamau.
Take care.
Peace.